I would like to now invite Ofir Drori to come to the podium. Ofir has been working in Cameroon and throughout Central Africa to work with local communities and develop a culture of activism and rejection of a culture of impunity, and to fight the illegal trade in wildlife and the corruption that is endemic in many of these regions. And it's a question of empowering people to fight against a system that is harming them, that's destroying their livelihoods and their own futures, and to work with them and to empower them to actually take the matters into their own hands and to use the legal system to go after the people who are destroying their futures. Ofir, thank you.
Sorry, I see that I start by fixing up my shoes. Thank you very much. I would like to think that I'm receiving this award today not just on my behalf, but on behalf of a larger group of African activists that are sharing with me the fight to establish wildlife law enforcement in Central Africa. I will tell you a little bit about our innovation in integrating the fight against corruption into conservation, and I will tell the story as a personal story of my journey, personal journey into conservation. As an outsider, it offers some lessons as to who can participate in conservation efforts. So it all started when I was 18. I took a backpack, went to Kenya to travel in the reserves. I was so fascinated with everything I saw that I didn't really notice that I trekked out of the reserves, and I was lost. And these were the guys that found me, and I lived with them. I lived with the tribes, and this is how I fell in love with Africa. For those in the back that didn't notice, this is me on the right. So after my military service, I went back to Africa, and I came back as an adventurer, crossing thousands of kilometers through the wilderness, living in the most remote areas, crossing with my camel, with a horse, with my canoe, and on foot. And what I was trying to do, I was trying to find the most remote communities, and I wanted to live with them, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn from African traditions, many values that we in the West maybe have long lost. So it was very natural for me to turn into an activist from there, trying to give a little bit to the continent that gave me so much, from teaching in villages to assisting in humanitarian operations, to becoming a photojournalist and writing from war zones about human rights issues. And this is how I arrived to Cameroon, basically as a photojournalist, trying to take a break from writing about human rights in Nigeria, stoning of women. I thought that this will be a straightforward and simple, relatively, thing for me to do, to write about the extinction of apes. I had in my head a sentence from Jane Goodall that in 15 to 20 years from now, we're going to lose these magnificent creatures to illegal trade, and I thought that was enough my time to try to do something about it. I wanted to inform the public, and I wanted to direct the public to the good conservation efforts that are there fighting against this dark prophecy of Jane Goodall. And when I arrived to Cameroon, the consequences were very straightforward. And those who have soft stomach, please do not watch these videos. But this is what I saw. The trade in apes was very wide open and very clear. But it was also an organized trade. It was clear that it was not generated by poverty. It was driven by the rich and the powerful, as most of what you see here was ordered by high officials, sometimes minister. It was a well-organized trade. The crate that you see here was used to transport 6 chimps at a time, each chimp fetching to the exporter a dozen thousands of dollars. So it was very well organized and implicating local authorities. But there was a law in Cameroon to prevent all this. There was a law, clear, strong, that was giving 3 years imprisonment to anybody who was doing any of this. So as a photojournalist, my question was, how many times this law was applied? And this was the answer I got. 0 wildlife prosecutions. Cameroon had a law for almost a decade, but it has not been applied even a single time. My research for the article showed that it was not just Cameroon. almost all of forest-covered Africa, Central and West Africa, were having very sufficient laws, but those laws were not applied even a single time. 0 is quite a strong number to try to explain. And I had the sense that I was stumbling over a very big indicator of a failure. Trying to explain this, the obvious suspect was at the time corruption, as government officials were not only not doing their work in applying the law, they were very openly implicated in the trade itself. But it was not just a failure of African governments, it was a conservation failure. I mean, I had almost all my article done at that point. Illegal trade, law not applied, fight against corruption, race towards extinction. That's very simple. What I was looking for was an ending, a happy ending, the light in the end of the tunnel. So I went to the conservation NGOs and I was looking for answers. But they were saying, well, we do not tell African governments what to do. We do workshops, we do conferences, we do long processes. All this for me sound very funny and very, very remote from the realities that we had in front of us. So there was a striking contrast between the millions of dollars that were poured into conservation NGOs under the buzzwords bushmeat and gorilla conservation and the very clear failure to protect the endangered species once you look at a specific species. But the real question I had was, why did they have to go throughout all this effort, all this extent, to actually find this failure? Where was this failure hiding? Why couldn't I just know this from the outside? And there's many reasons for that, but one observation that I had was that conservation was moved away from clear indicators of success and failure. There was no measurable standard. And when you do not know what you're looking for, it's very easy to hide your failure. Another contributing factor was the ecosystem approach. The ecosystem approach, not looking at a specific species at the time, was also contributing in helping to mask this kind of failure. Corruption has been identified as #1 obstacle for development in general in countries like Cameroon. I found it hard to believe that conservation is an exception to that. And in fact, in conservation in Cameroon, it was quite open that corruption was clearly there and was clearly an obstacle to our conservation objectives. At the same time, conservation officials I was talking to were finding it very hard to even pronounce the word corruption. That's why I wrote it 3 times over there, and that's basically my rule for the last 8 years, that every presentation will have the word corruption 3 times in it. But conservation was not just ignoring corruption. In fact, being no exception to any other sector in a country like Cameroon, they were fueling corruption. Conservation projects were fueling corruption, and many times by themselves were plagued with corruption. So there I was with an unfinished article, still waiting for the light in the end of the tunnel, very frustrated from conservation, and my research to the article took me outside of the capital where I could take pictures like this on the first day. And the people in the rural town I was arriving to were very straightforward. They said, well, here it is, we have chimp meat sold there, and we have gorilla hens sold there, and we also have 2 live ones. So I said, well, take me to the live ones. But what did they mean by 2 live ones? Well, when a poacher is killing an ape, it usually kills a few members of the family at one time. And if a poacher kills a mother, the baby, just like a human baby, is helpless, and it clings to the mother's body and cries. So a poacher can just lift the baby ape and see there's not much meat in it to sell, so either he can try to kill him and get what he can get from the meat, or he can try his luck selling him for the pet trade. In this scenario, the baby chimp will be a survivor for a few more months before he dies. And this is what I had in front of me. They took me to this baby orphan chimp. And he was abused, and he was sick, and they were treating him like a rat. And in fact, he was acting like a rat. Such a creature with such emotional world was having his world locked. He was acting like a rat, locking his emotional world. And these young babies, they don't need just food and water. They need also love and attention. In fact, especially with baby gorillas, it is known that even when they get all the physical needs, if they don't have love and attention, they just let themselves die.